Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dawn of Drones podcast. I'm Dawn Zoldi, your host and the CEO of P3 Tech Consulting. We are kicking off a brand new month. I cannot believe we're in December. We're calling this one the best of 2022. It is being sponsored by Sagetech Avionics again, second year in a row. So thank you, Sagetech. And we have with us CEO Tom Furey. Great to see you, Tom.
Hi, Dawn. Good morning. Great to see you, and I can't believe it's another December already. It's been a heck of a year, and I'm looking forward to today's show.
Absolutely. I can't wait to dig into everything you have been doing with Sagetech and some of your thoughts on the industry this year. So why don't we just kick it off with a little bit of background about you first, Tom. Tell them kind of a little bit about your history.
Sure. Okay. So my history started with going to college a long time ago at a place called the U.S. Naval Academy. And my love of aviation. So I flew airplanes for a while, A6 intruders off of aircraft carrier decks, and you can't have a better job and get paid taxpayers' money to do that. So that led to my love of aviation and aerospace. Past that, then I've had a 25+ year career in industry, engineering and operations general management, which has really, for me, culminated in an amazing small business opportunity working on technology associated with aerospace and unmanned aerospace in particular at Sagetech.
So that's a great segue, Tom, to give a little bit of background on Sagetech here. And I think we have a really cool video to run. So why don't we go ahead and roll that now?
Awesome.
Such a great video, Tom. And you know what I love also about your website? You actually have your values up there, your vision for the company. So tell us a little bit about what Sagetech is all about. That video gave us a good overview, but I'd love to hear it in your words.
Sure. Very simply, and as you said, it is we're a values-driven organization, and I don't mean that in some religious way. I mean that we've identified values that we care about as a company, and that's what we focus on in the way we operate and in the products and solutions that we create. And we're all about airspace safety. So safety is beyond integrity is I would say it's one of our leading values. And that's not just wearing safety shoes in the office and not dropping something on our foot, but that's safety of airspace integration. Because Dawn, as you know, as we look towards the future Jetson land of package deliveries and people deliveries and unmanned and optionally manned vehicles, more and more crowded airspace, it's crucial that we maintain the level of safety that we've generated over the past 100+ years of aviation. And that's what our company focuses on. So as a company, we're a small business in the Pacific Northwest of the US in a place called Bingen, Washington. We are a technology company, so most of the people in our company are engineers, and we design very small safety electronics, avionics for use in unmanned and potentially manned or crewed vehicles. We've got a legacy that comes from creating transponders. So we started our company 3 years ago, but it was carving out a division from another company that for about the past dozen years invented the first micro transponder. It's got millions of flight hours in US DoD OEM support activities over the years. And we've evolved from there into things that I'm sure we'll talk about around IFF and now in collision avoidance and detect and avoid solutions.
Yeah,
So that's who we
absolutely.
are. We develop new technology for safety.
Well, and for those that don't know, the uninitiated, IFF is a military term, right? Can you tell everybody what that
Yep.
is?
Sure. IFF is identify friend or foe. It's a bit of a misnomer. It identifies friend and then potential foes, right? So transponders developed back with the Brits in World War II as IFF to identify friendly aircraft coming back home as opposed to bombers coming in to flatten London. It evolved into a method for the FAA and civil aviation authorities for deconflicting airspace. But then there's a version of transponders, which with a transponder, if you think about from a civil perspective, LA Center might interrogate an aircraft and then get information about that aircraft so that it can help deconflict traffic in the air. From a military IFF perspective, it's essentially the same, except you're connected through encryption and through a crypto computer in ways that NATO and allied air forces can recognize an individual response as friendly aircraft versus a potentially hostile aircraft. So it's again, it's safety related, but in this case, a military to make sure you understand who it is you're looking at when you look at another aircraft.
Gotcha, gotcha. And, that's so key. And I know we're going to talk about detect and avoid, which I think most people in the commercial sector understand what that is and how you've, kind of evolved into that as well. But before we get into that, Tom, let's talk a little bit about the stakeholders that you work with.
Sure. We are our company, aside from developing technology, is a company of connectors because we recognize, and Dawn, I think you and I have talked about this, and I'm sure you've talked about it with others. The UAS industry is an industry of collaborators, right? We can't move as rapidly through this industry if people are doing everything in their little silos. So when we put things on aircraft, it's critical that we work with aircraft OEMs, the manufacturers of the aircraft, to make sure we're providing the right solutions for them at the right size, weight, and power, et cetera. But then as we look with things like IFF, we have other systems, subsystems we need to play with. So we partner with those companies. And then in the broader commercial space, as we'll see, and especially as we talk about ACAS-based detect and avoid, I think we'll talk a little bit more about it, but we've got to partner with the people that are on the leading edge of developing sensors for non-cooperative traffic, whether those are radar or vision or acoustic sensors. We partner with companies that are making autopilots and mission control computers because we can lead to autonomy that can provide commands into there. Plus, we partner with regulators. So, with NASA in developing leading edge potential technologies for the FAA, and then the FAA and RTCA committees. And on the military side, the DoD AIMS, which is a NATO and friendly force certification body for IFF type technology. So, we have to partner with all those regulators as well as all the other collaborators that are making similar or adjacent technologies to our own.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've seen you out and about, and I know you're doing great things, and a lot has happened this year. In fact, you've also grown like your international sales presence this year as well. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's we've always been a company from the origins of this transponder technology a dozen years ago that have sold globally. But typically it's been kind of a few customers that come find us. We've got a network of partners that are resellers, and truthfully, they're really more technical partners than they are resellers that identify opportunities, position us with alongside them for international opportunities. And in particularly this year, Don, when you talk about a year that a lot of things have changed,
Yes.
aside from the evolution on the commercial side, in February, suddenly we've, since February, been facing the aggression of Russia over in Eastern Europe. And
Yes.
suddenly we find ourselves, I was in Eastern Europe 2 weeks ago. Right. We
Really?
find ourselves with a lot of customers that are suddenly saying, "Hey, we need to upgrade our military capability. We see where drones play a key part in military offensive and defensive capabilities. And it's important that we recognize whose drone is friendly and whose isn't. So our IFF technology that, as you recall, we certified last year,
Yes.
is super critical for that. So we're finding a lot of activity around the world, but in particularly those countries that are now a little bit nervous about the aggressor that's in their backyard.
Yeah, so absolutely. So we're talking about the MX12B transponder
Yes.
that you were, yeah, you got certified last year, and also, right, meets the NATO standard, which is really critical
Yep.
for these partners that you're talking about. And for those out there, Tom and I have talked about this a little bit last year in the Dawn of Drones. Uh, Also, I wrote a couple articles about this. I think you can find these. Well, I know you can find them on my website, P3 Tech Consulting, but I believe you can also find them on Sagetech's
Yep.
website as well. But yeah, I mean, this idea of knowing who the friendly is and who is not on the battlefield, you're absolutely right, Tom, has become even more important when we see this, let's just call it explosion, no, no pun intended, of drones on the battlefield. And Tom, what I find really interesting, and I think you would agree, just given your military background, is it's not the traditional military, just the traditional military drones we're seeing out there. It's commercial off the shelf, like in large
Right.
numbers. And so I'm just curious, going off script here, of course, just curious, like, are people starting to think about integrating your IFF technology into those commercial assets, or is that something different? Like, how are they, is that remote ID or something different?
Yeah. No. Yeah. Yes and no. So
Okay.
for commercial use,
Yeah.
no. But for military use, dual use technologies,
Right.
what we see, and I think you some of your articles were prescient, right? You talked, I think it was a year or even two ago,
Yeah.
about the need for identifying friend versus foe in airspace with drones. Well, look what happened over the course of this year, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Iranian drones being used by Russia that look just like Western technology drones, right? So what we're finding is commercial technology is evolving so rapidly. It's military doesn't need to invest in developing UAS technology. They can just leverage the technology that's being developed for the commercial side.
Yeah, and we're
So to answer
seeing
your
that,
question,
right?
yeah,
Right, Tom?
when those dual use drones are used for military purposes,
Right.
that's where IFF is important because the countries, I should say, in Eastern Europe that are employing those drones for surveillance on their eastern front, right? They want to make sure when those drones are coming back home that they can adequately recognize those as friendly drones so they don't feel that they're getting attacked. Because even the recent advertent or inadvertent, if advertent is a word, right? Damage that occurred in Poland, right, from the
Right.
nearby conflict. You've got to understand what these airborne threats are. And so the best way to do that is to ensure you know what your assets are so
Yeah.
that therefore you can distinguish with the other threats. So that was a long answer to a short question, but yes, because dual use technology is so important for all militaries right now because it's
Right.
evolving so rapidly, we're seeing a lot of applications of drones that have been developed for commercial use that are used for military that are now employing IFF.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, Tom. I mean, and you know this, and I think many of our users, many of our listeners know this as well. Defense Innovation Unit's Blue UAS program, right? That's exactly what they're doing, is
Yep,
taking
exactly.
commercial off-the-shelf technology, leveraging that for military and other federal use. And yes, they're integrating higher level important components, like I know in the radio, right, encryption, for example, to a certain standard that you're not going to find on the commercial side. So having that IFF in there makes a lot of sense. But that's maybe a great segue to talk a little bit about standards, because Tom, you alluded to this earlier. You've been very involved in a whole bunch of committees working on, universal standards for IFF and detect and avoid and other things. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've done this year?
Sure. The On the IFF side, we continually work with those groups, right? So one of the exciting things, and maybe I'm going off script or getting ahead of
No,
ourselves.
that's fine.
One of the
Go.
things I'm super excited about is, I mentioned the IFF, and I always love to play this down, right? IFF is kind of like Marco Polo, if you remember playing that game as
Yeah,
a
in the
kid, right?
pool.
Marco
Yeah,
Polo,
polo.
right? That's the interrogation game, right? So
Mhm.
a fighter aircraft, a Patriot missile battery, or LA Center interrogate an aircraft and they get a response. And on the military side, it's an encrypted response, right? Um, ADSB, if you recall, is a new technology being used in quote next gen FAA and EASA airspace regulation, and that's we've talked about before, more of the Horton here's a who. You're not waiting for an interrogation. You're not waiting for a Marco. You're just saying we're here, we're here, we're here. You're doing it multiple times per second, so
Okay.
that all aircraft can see who else is in the airspace. That ADSB is a civil technology and it has its own challenges because it's not encrypted at all, it's insecure, etc. But what we'll see evolving, and we're working with the Ames office to certify a device there. We've demonstrated it at Army and international exercises this year. It's called
Okay.
Mode 5 Level 2 Broadcast, which is encrypted secure ADSB. So
Oh,
now, instead of
wow.
having to interrogate an aircraft to
Right.
determine whether it's friendly, interrogators are big and expensive, right?
Yep.
Now you can just passively listen. And if you have the right equipment, Mode 5 Level 2B in as a receiver, you can
Yep.
receive those broadcasts that are Mode 5 Level 2B out transmissions that are essentially encrypted ADSB to use for further securing the combat airspace and identifying who's friendly and who's potentially hostile.
So,
So that's
so
a
Tom,
super exciting new technology.
well, that's amazing, and I love how you like distill this down to like the Dr. Zeus like kindergarten level.
It's
With
right on
all,
my
no,
intelligence level.
it's like definitely my level. Like it's Horton Hears a Who and Marco Polo. I can totally understand that. So my question is, do these work together then? Like, will the Mode 5 ADSB in out work with IFF? In other words, will most kind of aircraft on the battlefield have both, or are you thinking, one or the other? Like, how is that going to work, do you think?
Well, I think, and this is a gradual thing, so it's a new
Sure.
technology and obviously evolving military technology. But what's exciting, picture what might happen today, and I've heard this from our forces, right? You may have a U.S. Army manned helicopter, crewed helicopter, who can't fly because he knows that they are in his flight area. There are drones in the air, right? And that's a
Okay.
safety hazard because he can't necessarily see where all of those drones are, right?
Okay.
And particularly can't tell whether they're friendly or not. Um, if you wanted, if in today's technology, if you want to have a helicopter recognize whether a drone that's in the air is friendly or potentially hostile, you've got to put an interrogator on that.
Okay.
Interrogators have directional antennas. They're big, they're expensive, they're
Uh,
heavy. They're
yeah.
additional equipment that we put on fighter aircraft, we put on ships, we put on missile batteries, right? But you can't put them on every aircraft.
Okay.
What you can do is put in an encrypted ADSB receiver, which is a Mode 5 Level 2B. Our
Okay.
MX 12B device will
Hmm.
contain Mode 5 Level 2B out this year. We're working to certify that now. And it
Okay.
can also contain a Mode 5 Level 2B receiver. So now, in simple low size, weight, and power equipage, you can put it on all aircraft. So all military aircraft can recognize when there are other aircraft in the airspace and whether they're friendly or potentially hostile. So it's anticipated over the next years to be outfitted across all NATO aircraft of any type that carry IFF, that they can carry a receiver as well as a transmitter, and they can deconflict themselves in the airspace.
Wow, that is hugely significant. So the drones you're talking about for your MX-12B, first of all, I don't know if you have one there handy or whatever. Like, it's very small. Can you describe how
Right.
small it is?
Yeah, I don't, unfortunately, because we have our first snow day and I couldn't get out of my driveway today. But it is literally exactly the size of a deck of cards. It weighs 190 grams, which is well less than half a pound. And
Okay.
this is compared to traditional IFF. Um, when we certified that in early 2021, it was the very first micro IFF. Prior
Right.
to that, the smallest was 7 pounds, and we lovingly call it a cinder block because that's
Yeah.
how
I
big
mean,
it was.
that's right.
Yeah, now it's the size of a deck of cards and it weighs well less than half a pound. And then you add a very small encryption computer with it, and you have a complete IFF system that's that size. Um, that platform, by the way, Dawn, if you remember, we spoke at Exponential this year.
Yes.
In was it Orlando? Is that where it was? It's been
No,
a
this,
heck of a
yeah, no, this
year.
year was Orlando. I know it's all
Yeah.
blur.
So we talked, and one of the things you asked me is what's next, and what's next was that civil version of the MXS was getting certified, and we
Yes.
anticipated it kind of quote momentarily after the show.
Yeah, which was
It
April.
did, yeah, and it came through in May. We got FAA certification. It's the same hardware platform, so that same deck of card size,
Yep.
but there's a civil version of that that has Mode S transponder, but then ADS-B in and out for airspace safety in civil airspace. So now for integrating unmanned vehicles into the national airspace, they can play in the same ATM system when they're in the national airspace that today's manned aircraft do or crewed aircraft do.
Okay, well, first of all, congratulations on that accomplishment. That's huge.
Thank you.
I do have a question. So it is so small. It weighs like I think you said less than half a pound. So as a practical matter, for Part 107, as an example, 55 pounds or less, do you anticipate the civil version of your transponder being able to go on let's just call it by definition, a small UAS? uh, in addition to larger ones on the civil side?
By only by exception. So if you
Okay.
recall when the remote ID rule came out, one of the
Yes.
things that the remote ID rule addressed was that less than 55 pound, and I say 55, you say 55. I think the FAA says around 55 pounds. So
Okay.
or
That's
that
precise.
sort of smaller UAS, larger UAS, and in
Yep.
lower airspace, lower altitude airspace versus
Right.
larger or higher airspace. So you're
Right.
talking generally the less than 400 feet and less than 55 pounds. While you could equip them with our MX, and in some cases we're working with customers to do so,
Okay.
um, you're not going to transmit ADS-B and you're not going to respond to interrogations because
Right.
there's a spectrum saturation concern, which is a
Yes.
valid concern, right? If you get thousands of aircraft in the airspace, all squittering as it's called, and
Yep.
squawking and all the other SQ things that we do,
Yep.
you're going to saturate the airspace and no one will know who else is there, and you'll eliminate safety as opposed to improving safety. What we're
Okay.
developing as we move into next year, and again, um, you and I had talked about what comes next, right?
Right.
We're working on a very small, and again, I wish I had it with me. If I was able to get to the office today, I'd have it. But
It's okay.
now we're talking 2 ounces, less than 60 grams, right? So a third the weight of the MX, a passive multi-band receiver that can receive all aspects of ADS-B that's out there, right? So it can
Okay.
receive that. It could actually transmit if necessary at a low power, but generally it won't transmit for the smaller aircraft. But then it includes ACAS SXU collision avoidance capability. So when it sees other aircraft, it can also take in feeds from what we call non-cooperative sensors. So the language there, Dawn, on the civil collision avoidance side, when aircraft are communicating via standard transponder type signals, whether it's ADS-B or transponder, that's called cooperative traffic.
Okay.
There's plenty of aircraft in the airspace that are non-cooperative. That doesn't make them illegal or improperly equipped. It means for whatever reason they don't need to have a transponder on board, or maybe it's inoperable, right? You still need to see and avoid those aircraft. So that's
Right.
where, when we talked earlier about industry partnerships, we partner with companies that are making radar systems. And in January, I think we'll have an announcement where we've done some significant integration with a radar partner.
Okay.
We're working with vision systems, and we'll have another announcement to announce that. We're working it under the Assure program, the FAA program.
Yep.
So we bring in those leading edge sensor feeds for non-cooperative traffic. And then all in this little box, we do determine whether there's a risk of collision and provide avoidance commands either to the operator or directly to the autopilot. And we're working with OEMs that are leading and doing testing, et cetera, right now. Next year, we anticipate having our first, not certified, but commercial product along those lines. And that brings it all back to that's kind of where we'll see the below 55-pound aircraft equipped. They will passively listen to the other aircraft that are in the airspace. They
Okay.
will communicate through UTM systems with companies, and some partners of ours, like One Sky, for example. Um, and they will use that information from who else is in the UTM, ADSB receivers to say who's in the ATM or the air traffic management system, and then use certifiable logic, ACAS SXU logic, to determine whether there's a risk of a collision and then avoid that collision. So again, focused on safety. We don't want any aircraft to ever swap paint in the air unless it's on purpose.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's such an integral part of unmanned traffic management or UAS traffic management. But I want to kind of step back because I want to understand better, make sure everybody out there understands. You'd said the MX-12B, kind of the civil version of it, that you're working with some folks that are incorporating that into their hardware, as an example.
Right.
What market use cases on the commercial side are we talking about? Because you're right, you were absolutely right, of course, as always. The remote ID rule, said for the small UAS, like no ADSB in and out, right? Forbidden kind of thing, verboten. So are we talking larger aircraft, like the ship to shore kind of market use case, where they're like hauling heavier things, like drones over 55 pounds? I mean, is that your kind of target market for that particular
Yeah,
product?
it's sort of, well, yes, but
Okay.
also with a caveat, right? So ADSB in is absolutely allowed and recommended for smaller aircraft, right? To
Okay.
passively receive other traffic signals from aircraft that are transmitting is, we think, super important. So they
Okay.
need to have ADSB in
In.
receivers that are certified that
Okay.
can then feed into collision avoidance. Now
Okay.
you're right. On the other side, we're looking at generally aircraft that are above 55 pounds. So think about the use cases that we expect to get economic advantage from drones, right? And that is middle mile package delivery, in some
Yes.
cases maybe last mile package delivery, depending on the size and weight, right? But
Right.
the people that are able to bring cargo from immediate delivery from factories to warehouses or warehouse to warehouse, right? Eliminate a lot of the truck traffic that is on the road today doing those things, eliminating the delays in transportation we see. That's an
Right.
amazing use case for it, where we're
Absolutely.
working with partners who are in that cargo delivery kind of space. Long range linear infrastructure, right? So we have a partner we've been working with for years, American Aerospace Technologies. They've been working under NASA projects and they've gotten some waivers. But think about all of the people that have to go out in harm's way in pickup trucks to drive across places to inspect pipelines, to inspect power lines, and things like that, right?
Right.
Um, there are some use cases for very small drones, drone in a box, to do local repetitive inspections. But our customers with the MXS and the ACAS XU for larger aircraft, right, are
Right.
able to fly 600 kilometers and do infrastructure inspection the entire way from an uncrewed vehicle, not have to send anybody out, and maybe manage a fleet of drones that are doing that, all with a single operating center coordinating that. Those are some of the key use cases we see, those long linear infrastructure inspections, middle mile cargo delivery, et cetera, right?
Yep. So, I mean, right there, you're talking beyond visual line of sight, and
Yep.
I imagine as these folks, because we both know where we are with that rule, there is none yet. We're getting exceptions to 107 for some of these folks with the smaller aircraft anyway. BVLOS, Aviation Rulemaking Committee put out the big report this year. That was a big thing.
Yep.
But I imagine those people that actually do need waivers would integrate your technology and highlight it as a big part of their safety proposition.
It is, yeah, both for a waiver, so that adds to the safety case. So when you're applying for a waiver, the more you can prove to the FAA or to the Civil Aviation Authority, wherever you may be, that you can operate safely, the better, right? So and we believe in multiple redundant layers of safety, right? I'm not here to tell you that buy a Sagetech box and now you're guaranteed safe, but we are a critical part of one of the layers of safety, right? So having cooperative and non-cooperative sensors on board, being part of a UTM, if that's the aerospace that you're flying in, et cetera, all of these layers provide safety. So for a waiver, working with our technology helps with that. As importantly, where we really see a lot of our customers is they're working their way through the aircraft type certification process with the FAA.
Yes.
So that we get to that nirvana of having routine BVLOS ops without requiring a waiver, right? That we play, and we're working with a company called Applied Aeronautics, who are a drone OEM, and we're working with a few academic partners: Embry-Riddle University, University of North Dakota, in Kentucky. We're working with test sites like the Northern Plains UAS test site, Lone Star test site, and we're working collectively with the FAA Assure 54 project to start to define those right-of-way rules in beyond visual line of sight, and that's with our layers of safety on board, integrated with non-cooperative sensors and integrated with ground control systems. So our customers are both using our technology for applying for waivers, but then also they're putting it as part of their system, and we have some UAM, urban air mobility customers, that are using our technology as they work through their certification basis with the FAA to have fully certified routine BVLOS operations, and we're part of that safety stack.
Well, I was just going to ask you about that, because in your video you had essentially an electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft featured as part of that video, eVTOL. So you're working with those companies as well to employ your technology as they're going through their type cert.
We are, and what they love about it is we're providing, ACAS, and again, not to dive too far into the weeds, because we're surveillance geeks, it's called, right? But ACAS has multiple versions. I touched on ACAS SXU for small aircraft. That's a version of collision avoidance for passive and small aircraft. There's ACAS XU for larger fixed wing, and those are your long linear infrastructure.
Okay.
Then there's ACAS XR, and that's for rotorcraft. And that can be anything above 55 pounds, and it could be 55,000 pounds, right? The interesting thing about ACAS XR is, ACAS collision avoidance is a successor to TCAS, traffic collision avoidance, and it's been around for decades, helping commercial pilots avoid collisions. There's never been a TCAS really designed for rotorcraft, because TCAS requires a certain vertical speed above 1,500 feet per minute and requires a certain ground speed above 100 knots that you can't guarantee that a helicopter will be able to carry those. So there's never been a helicopter or a rotorcraft specific collision avoidance system.
Okay.
ACAS XR is that first collision avoidance system designed for the flight dynamics of a rotorcraft.
Okay.
So what our UAM customers love is when that aircraft is piloted, we're providing those collision avoidance cues in cockpit to the pilot of the aircraft. As they move down the road in the future to autonomy, where these aircraft then are unpiloted and fully autonomous, by our integrating with the leading sensor manufacturers in the world, they now take it from a collision avoidance system to an autonomous detect and avoid system that can feed directly into an autopilot. So we help them along that continuum from piloted to optionally piloted, pilot in the loop, pilot on the loop, pilot over the loop, and then finally pilot the hell out of the loop, right? Which is where I
Yeah,
want to be down the road.
right. Wow. Okay, so much there going on. And you're you've been doing these flight demonstrations June through December of this year, I think, with the ACAS XU specifically, and that's the small one that you just mentioned.
That's large fixed wing.
Oh,
So
large
ACAS,
fixed wing.
and
Okay.
we've been doing some with ACAS SXU, some with ACAS XU, right?
Okay.
And we're gearing towards ACAS XR, which the RTCA committees and we work with them. That's a few years down the road before that one's finalized, but it's in test, and we've done some tests. So we've been flying with all of them: XR, XU, and SXU.
Okay, wow, that's just amazing. You've been doing a lot of things this year, Tom. I mean, besides getting your, let's just call it your commercial version of the MX-12B approved, that's what you got in May. Did I just do that?
Yep,
Say that
that's
right?
correct.
Okay,
Yep.
all right. It's hard to keep track because you've achieved so much. You did in all of this different R&D with Assure and University of Kansas and University of North Dakota, which I love, by the way. I was just up there in October. I think you were too. I saw you
I
there.
was. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. You did a really cool thing in Germany in military airspace. This was in June. I'm
We
just
did
jumping.
one. Yeah, one of our customers, Primico UAV, actually gained. It's not just. It wasn't a one-time thing. They actually gained an LUC, so they've basically gotten a long-term waiver for flying beyond line of sight, and our technology was a critical part of their safety case to achieve that.
Oh wow, that's terrific. That's great. And speaking of events, we just mentioned the one where we saw each other in October. That was the UAS
Yep.
Summit and Expo in North Dakota. By the way, everybody, if you haven't been to it yet, you need to go. It's really it's such a great community out there. I love it. How everybody's aligned, from the university through Northrop Grumman, General Atomics,
And
Senator
the test
Hogan.
site, the government, yeah.
Oh my gosh, I know Senator Hoven was on I did a live stream and he was a hoot. I mean, this guy, he's all over it. He loves drones and it was just so cool to see someone in government like that was so supportive of what is
Right.
happening in this industry. You mentioned exponential. Are there any looking back over the year, I'm sure you've been to a couple other shows, any that like stand out?
I think exponential really stood out for me this year. And I say that because, first of all, you and I got to participate together on one of
We
your
did.
broadcasts or whatever it
Yes.
was.
Yeah.
But most importantly, if you remember, the year before was the first post-pandemic exponential. I think it was in Atlanta, and it was
Yes,
a
that's
bit of
right.
a letdown because people still hadn't sort of emerged from the pandemic. It felt like at that exponential last spring was the first time where people really emerged from the pandemic. The industry was collaborating face to face again. There was just so much going on. We participated in the commercial UAV Expo, Drone Expo, whatever it was in Las Vegas.
Yep, September.
Participated in defense industry days over in Eastern Europe, as I mentioned, and we've had our partners participating in air shows kind of around the world. But that emerging from the cave to Orlando with Exponential, I got to say that one really stuck out for me. That finally it felt like we had moved the needle at coming out of the pandemic as an industry.
I agree. I mean, I remember that week and it was just such a blur. First of all, you attended my very first Law Tech Connect workshop, which I
That's
appreciated.
right. I forgot. Yeah, I almost forgot
Yeah,
about that.
that was on Monday and it just kind of got, in fact, actually we had a happy hour Sunday night. We did this thing Monday and then it just kind of got more insane from there. I was like physically, mentally, spiritually, in every way exhausted by the end of that week, but in a good way.
Yeah.
I thought it was great. And I hope to see everybody out in Denver next year. We do in Law Tech Connect again on Monday, May 8th. And it should be great. Denver's an hour from my house, so super excited. We're in Colorado. So all good stuff. But where might you go next year? What do you have kind of on the docket?
In terms of shows, you mean?
Yeah.
Probably kind of more of the same, right? So I
Yeah.
anticipate that we'll continue to partner, as I mentioned, internationally. We continue to strengthen our partner network globally. We've now got partners that we're working with in Korea and in Japan, in Eastern Europe, as I mentioned, in many countries there, in Turkey and in Saudi Arabia and South Africa, et
Oh,
cetera.
wow.
So
Yeah.
we'll participate whether live or virtually with them in a lot of international shows. We'll be at Exponential in Denver, obviously. We anticipate we'll be at the Commercial UAV Expo. We'll be back, as you mentioned, the UAS Summit. The first time I sort of begrudgingly went to North Dakota in October. Not sure why I was going. And I will
Yes.
say that's a do not miss kind of show, because it is such a kind of UAS or drone centric community up there with the test site, the government, etc. I can't say enough. Just like you
Yeah.
mentioned. So that's what we anticipate next year. But who knows? There may be others that emerge, because there were certainly some that weren't on our docket this year. There's a lot of, being military players, we spend a lot of time at different military shows. I mean, I was in Huntsville, I was at Fort Rucker, I was at Fort Stewart this year. We'll be at probably maybe Tailhook for the Naval Aviation Association, the Association of the Air Force, Quad A lot of military shows as well. So
Very
it's going to
cool.
be another busy year next year.
It will be. I already, I've kind of vowed like maybe to only travel 1 week a month, right? That was like my vow for 2023. I've already blown that for January. I'm at least traveling 2 weeks, maybe three that month already. Like it's insane. But what I would say to you and to everybody out there too is, the National Business Aviation Association, NBAA, does this BACE, right, event every year. It's huge. For manned aviation, you know about this, Tom, but I think for the first year, and I did have to scale back this year. I was all ready to go, and the last minute I didn't go, but I heard it was phenomenal. My good friend Tony Drummond went. They have a whole emerging technologies section that continues to grow, and eVTOL aircraft, drones highlighted there. And I feel like 2023, I hope, is our breakout year. When I say breakout year, I mean breaking down those stovepipes, because you've been talking about it this whole entire podcast, Tom, the fact that, your technologies are relevant for all kinds of aviation, whether it's small drones, large drones, eVTOL aircraft, general aviation, they all are going to be in the same airspace. And that's probably a great segue to this slide we have, because I know, you have a lot of things on the docket for next year, and I'm hoping that the drone people and the eVTOL people and the general aviation people actually get together and have the conversations that need to be had, and not just in their own little groups, right? So tell
Yep.
us about next year, and kind of how you see this all coming together for you.
Yeah, next year I mentioned we're going to have a super busy year, obviously, with the different shows. I, like you, share the hope and the expectation, actually, that we'll make substantial progress towards, the enablement of the industry, the continued enablement of the industry. And I don't find fault with the FAA at all, because, as I
No.
mentioned, our focus is safety, and I don't want to run into an unsafe condition as an industry and then have to backpedal. That'll set us back um, hugely, right? But
Right.
I do expect there to be more rules for making things more routine. I expect to see customers that are getting some certifications, et cetera. From our perspective as a company, we see the continued evolution of this ACAS, so we expect to have a product, like I mentioned, where we're doing some tech work with customers. We have plenty of prototypes that we're flying, but we anticipate commercializing probably that ACAS SXU for smaller aircraft, so passive
Yeah.
receivers plus the ACAS logic. And we anticipate continuing towards the certification path on the larger variants of the same. So for us, it's super exciting, but kind of more of the same. We're not suddenly going to go, make Kleenex. We're going to continue to create the world's leading low swap safety avionics, and we'll have a few milestones occur next year.
Well, I'm excited to keep watching this progress, because, Tom, I feel like I know since I started my company, I feel like we've been aligned, and I've been watching Sagetech grow and expand and continue to evolve with this industry. It's really, really exciting. We're getting close to our time together, to the end of it. How can people plug into your efforts? How can they find you? What's the best way?
Yep. So you can certainly reach out to me directly. We're a small company and we're all very involved. If they go to our website, sagetech.com, you'll see there's multiple ways that they can connect with us. Sagetech is easy, Sagetech, right? You can email customer success at sagetech.com. You can find us and follow us on LinkedIn or connect with us there as well. You know, your typical social media or website, I think we're pretty accessible. And then my contact information is all over our website, et cetera. If people want to reach out to me directly via cell, text, email, you name it.
And I know, I don't know if you said this, I was listening, but LinkedIn, you guys are very active on LinkedIn, as am I.
Yep.
So if you're not following Sagetech on LinkedIn, do that. Follow Tom personally. And then as we close out here, any final comments for the audience, Tom?
No, I'll just say, Dawn, I can't believe it's been a year since
I
we did
know.
this last December. As I look back, as I was preparing for this, I was kind of thinking, okay, what has happened over the last year? Oh my God, so much has happened. And I
Yes.
expect that to accelerate next year for us as a company. I expect to see it for you and for the industry overall. So I'm just very excited for what next year brings. I'm excited for what has happened this year. And I look forward to bumping into each other at all these different shows.
Absolutely. And thank you again for your patronship, basically, of this podcast for this month. We've got some other exciting, besides this one, of course, exciting podcasts coming out. We're going to end the year with NASA and the FAA again. So really excited about that. And then we're going to have a senior leader kind of look back and look forward episode as well. So that should be really fun. Of course, we got John Eberhardt from ATA in there as well with one episode. So it's going to be a great month. Thank you so much, Tom. That is all she wrote, everybody. We are out here.